Chosen one, listen closely. This message was never meant to reach the unmarked. If you are hearing this now, it means your name has already been moved to the active list. Not tomorrow, not someday, tonight. There is a reason your life has felt watched, measured, stalled at invisible checkpoints. A reason pressure intensified without explanation. You are standing inside a moment that civilizations only recognize in hindsight. What looks like an ordinary night on the surface is, beneath it, a locked room operation unfolding beyond human sight. This is not encouragement. This is disclosure. A veil has been lifted just enough for you to be briefed. Forces older than language are adjusting their positions. Counterforces are scrambling. And at the center of this silent escalation is you. Not by chance, not by virtue, but by designation. Pay attention. Miss this, and the moment closes without ceremony. Like this video, comment, "I am ready," and subscribe now to be one of the first 1,000 chosen ones. Who's ready for a powerful surprise? Chapter 1, The Timeline Fracture. This is the night. What is happening now is not improvement. It is not healing. It is not a reward cycle finally paying out. What unfolds tonight is mechanical, absolute, and indifferent to your comfort. A structural break, a cut so clean that the past version of your life does not get a transition period. There are moments when reality itself changes posture, when the framework holding events together loosens just enough for a different order to slide into place. You are entering one of those moments. It does not ask if you feel prepared. It does not wait for clarity. It proceeds because delay would cause more damage than shock. You may notice it first in your body, a sudden alertness without fear, or exhaustion that doesn't match your activity, or a strange stillness, as if something massive has just passed by without making a sound. These are not emotions, they are signals. Your internal systems are recalibrating to rules they have never operated under before. This fracture does not come with fireworks. It comes with silence. A kind of hush that feels wrong if you're used to chaos. That silence is intentional. Loud changes attract interference. Quiet changes lock in before opposition can respond. Here is the part few are ever told. Your life was not stuck. It was paused at a precise tension point. Movement before now would have exposed you. Progress would have triggered containment. So everything slowed. Opportunities thinned. Momentum vanished. From the outside, it looked like stagnation. From above, it was concealment. You were held exactly where pressure could shape you without breaking you. Tonight releases that hold. When this fracture occurs, continuity breaks. Certain habits will feel pointless immediately. Old urges may fail to activate. Arguments you used to rehearse in your mind will not complete their cycle. This is not maturity. This is incompatibility. Those behaviors belong to a version of reality that is no longer dominant. You may also feel loss without an object, grief without a memory. That is the echo of paths that no longer exist. Entire sequences that would have unfolded next week, next year, or a decade from now have been quietly erased. Not because they were evil, but because they were inefficient. The system you are moving into does not tolerate wasted motion. This is why the change is abrupt. Gradual shifts allow countermeasures. Abrupt shifts deny response time. By the time resistance understands what has happened, the environment has already updated around you. Notice this carefully. You are not being pushed forward. You are being repositioned. Forward implies direction. This is dimensional. Think of it as being moved one lane over, while everything else keeps driving. Unaware, the road itself has changed. From this point on, patterns that once took years to reveal themselves will surface quickly, not because life speeds up, but because delays are removed. Feedback becomes immediate. Alignment or friction will be obvious within days, sometimes minutes. You will know this fracture is active when things stop lingering. Conversations end cleanly. Situations resolve suddenly. Ambiguity collapses into clarity or exit. There is no middle ground here. And understand this: nothing about this shift depends on your belief. It was authorized long before your consent mattered. Your role now is not to initiate, but to remain aware enough not to sabotage what is already in motion. The night matters because thresholds matter. There are windows when transitions can occur without leaving scars. This is one of them. Missed windows require force. Force leaves evidence. Evidence invites pursuit. So the fracture is quiet, surgical, final. From here on, the question is not whether your life will change. That has already been decided. The question is how quickly you recognize that the rules you learned no longer apply, and how long it takes before you stop trying to live by them. Because once a new timeline asserts itself, resistance does not slow it down. It only determines what gets left behind. Chapter 2. The enemy loses your signal for a long time. You were not hunted directly. You were tracked, not chased in the open, not attacked head-on, but studied through repetition. Every reaction you had to pressure became a data point. Every emotional loop you fell back into became a reference marker. Every mistake you repeated under stress became a coordinate on a map drawn around you. The enemy never needed to know who you were becoming. They only needed to know how you responded when tired, when disappointed, when hopeful, when alone. Patterns were enough. Patterns always are. They watched how long it took before you doubted yourself, how quickly frustration turned into silence, how temptation found you at predictable moments, after effort, after loss, after waiting too long. This was not random. It was surveillance by behavior. You were not being opposed as a person, but as a system. And systems can be predicted, looped, exploited. Until tonight. Tonight, something fundamental collapses. Not dramatically, not loudly. The collapse happens the way a signal dies when a satellite drifts out of range. Sudden, total, and impossible to recover in real time. The patterns they depended on no longer resolve the same way. Inputs produce unfamiliar outputs. Emotional triggers fire and find no matching response. The loop breaks mid-cycle. From their perspective, this is catastrophic. The map they built around you relied on consistency. Even pain can be navigated if it repeats. Even resistance can be planned, for if it behaves the same way every time. But now, the reactions they expect don't arrive. The hesitation that once followed pressure doesn't appear. The internal argument they could provoke no longer starts. They send the same signal and receive silence, or worse, an unreadable response. This is what it means for the enemy to lose your signal. You may notice this first in the disappearance of pull. Things that once had weight suddenly feel hollow. Temptations that once spoke your language now sound distorted, like a voice on the wrong channel. It's not that they vanished, it's that they are tuned to a version of you that is no longer broadcasting. Frequency matters more than force. The enemy never relied on strength alone. They relied on resonance, the ability to match you emotionally, mentally, instinctively. But when your internal state shifts, even slightly, resonance fails. The same offer no longer excites. The same distraction no longer satisfies. The same escape route no longer opens. Old temptations stop working not because they were defeated, but because they are irrelevant. This creates a dangerous window for the enemy. When tracking fails, they don't immediately stop attacking. They escalate blindly. They launch what used to work. They repeat what always landed before. But those attacks are aimed at coordinates that no longer exist. Imagine a strike calculated to the exact location of a target, except the target moved before the order was executed. The force still arrives, the impact still happens, but it hits empty space. That is why attacks don't cease right away. They miss. You may feel pressure without panic. Situations that once would have triggered spirals now pass through you with minimal disturbance. Words that once cut deep now land flat. The environment still shakes, but your internal ground holds. This isn't numbness. It's misalignment between the attack and the target. They are striking who you were, and because they cannot immediately see this, confusion spreads on their side. Systems that depend on feedback begin to malfunction. Escalation without results creates instability. Uncertainty replaces precision. They don't know whether to push harder or pull back, whether to repeat or retreat. Their advantage was always familiarity. That advantage is gone. On your side, this feels like calm, but not the calm of safety. It is the calm of unengagement, the kind that happens when something stops having jurisdiction over you. The noise is still present, but it no longer dictates your internal weather. This calm is deceptive. It is not peace because the war ended. It is quiet because the signal was lost. Understand the danger of this moment. When an enemy loses tracking, they probe wildly. They test extremes. They look for anything that still produces a reaction. But reactions are exactly what they no longer receive. Emotional neutrality becomes a shield they cannot pierce because it offers no data. This is why you may feel strangely clear-headed under circumstances that should overwhelm you, or detached from outcomes that once defined your worth, or uninterested in conflicts that previously consumed your attention. The hooks aren't catching. The bait isn't landing. From the outside, nothing dramatic has changed. Inside, everything has. The loss of signal does not mean you are invisible. It means you are unpredictable. And unpredictability is the one condition no enemy can tolerate for long. Without a map, every move becomes a risk. Every engagement becomes expensive. Every attempt to regain control exposes them further. You are not fighting back. You are not counterattacking. You are simply no longer where they expect you to be. And this creates a strange reversal. Their confusion manifests as your steadiness. Their uncertainty produces your clarity. Their noise collapses into your silence. You may not feel powerful. You may not feel victorious. You may feel oddly normal, as if something heavy simply stopped pressing down. That is because the weight was never yours. It was the pressure of being tracked, measured, anticipated. Now that pressure has nowhere to land, the most dangerous thing for an enemy is not resistance. It is disappearance from the system they built to contain you. Not physical disappearance, but behavioral, emotional, internal disappearance. You still exist, but not in a way they can follow. And as the last known patterns fail to reappear, the space around you grows quiet. Not because nothing is happening, but because the war has temporarily lost its coordinates. Chapter 3, the test you didn't know you were passing. There was a stretch of time when your life felt sealed shut, not resisted, not attacked, just unmoving. Days stacked on top of days without progress, answers, or visible reward. Effort didn't open doors. Waiting didn't either. From the outside, it looked like stagnation. From within, It felt like being placed in a soundproof room where even your own thoughts echoed back unanswered. That stillness was not absence. It was testing silence. Silence is never empty in war. It is observation without interference. When nothing moves, every internal motion becomes visible. When nothing responds, every motive is exposed. That season was designed to remove distractions, so what remained could be measured clearly. Not what you said you believed, not what you hoped would happen, but what stayed intact when there was no feedback to reward you. You were watched closely in that quiet, not for dramatic failure or public collapse, but for subtle corrosion, bitterness creeping in slowly, justified by disappointment, pride hardening quietly, disguised as self-protection, desperation whispering that compromise might be necessary just to feel alive again. These were not temptations meant to destroy you outright. They were edits, small revisions to your inner code that would have changed who you are without you noticing. The pressure was intentional. Waiting applies a unique force. It presses on patience, then meaning, then identity. It asks whether you will rewrite yourself just to escape discomfort, whether you will become sharper, colder, louder, smaller, or more ruthless in exchange for motion. Many do, most do. The silence doesn't break them loudly, it erodes them quietly until they are no longer the same person who entered it. But the test was never about whether you achieved anything during that time. There were no points awarded for productivity, no credit for visible wins. The metric was far more exacting. The focus was on what did not change in you while everything around you stayed still. What values survived boredom? What integrity held when no one was watching? What compassion remained when you felt overlooked? What restraint stayed in place when nothing seemed to matter anymore? Under that pressure, personalities usually fracture. People begin to perform for attention, or withdraw into numbness, or reshape themselves to match whatever seems rewarded in the moment. The silence invites this. It dares you to abandon your original design in exchange for relief. That was the real risk of the season. Not failure, but distortion. You were not evaluated on how loud your faith was, or how confident your declarations sounded. You were evaluated on continuity, on whether the core of you remained recognizable when stripped of momentum, on whether frustration changed your ethics, on whether delay changed your character, on whether isolation rewrote your sense of worth. This is why the season lasted as long as it did. Tests like this cannot be rushed. Pressure reveals truth only when sustained. Anyone can hold steady for a week, some for months. But extended stillness exposes what is structural and what is performative. It shows which traits are real and which were borrowed from circumstance. At certain moments, the pressure intensified, just enough to provoke reaction. A near opportunity that disappeared. A door that almost opened and then didn't. A comparison that cut a little deeper than usual. These were not accidents. They were stress points introduced to observe response. Would you collapse inward, harden outward, or remain internally consistent even when disappointed? Every response was noted, not judged emotionally, but recorded accurately. Not perfection, but trajectory. Not emotionless endurance, but refusal to be rewritten. You were allowed to feel frustration, allowed to feel tired, allowed to question. But the line was whether those feelings became architects. Many never pass this stage, not because they fail dramatically, but because they adjust themselves too much to survive it. They become someone else to escape the weight. They trade depth for speed, substance for relief. And once that happens, advancement becomes impossible. Higher levels amplify whatever is unstable. So access is denied early to prevent greater damage later. Tonight marks the end of that evaluation. The verdict is not announced publicly. There is no ceremony, no external validation. Advancement at this level does not require witnesses. It requires alignment. And alignment has been confirmed. The core held. The internal structure remained intact. Pressure did not rewrite you. Silence did not hollow you out. Waiting did not turn you into something smaller or sharper than you were meant to be. Approved does not mean celebrated. It means cleared. It means the restrictions that existed solely to observe you no longer serve a purpose. The holding pattern ends because its objective has been met. This is not a reward for endurance. It is a recognition of readiness. And understand this clearly, this level is denied to those who break early, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Advancement without integrity multiplies damage. Power without internal consistency collapses under its own weight. So the gate remains closed until stability is proven under conditions that offer no incentive to perform. You remained yourself when there was no applause for it. You did not trade your inner orientation for speed. You did not allow frustration to author your decisions. That is what qualified you. Not talent, not ambition, not intensity, but coherence under pressure. This is why the season felt so unnecessary at the time. Necessary tests rarely feel justified while you're inside them. They feel excessive, silent, wasteful. Only after the verdict does their precision become visible. Nothing about that stretch was random. Nothing about the silence was accidental. It was the environment required to see who you were when stripped of momentum. And that observation is complete. Chapter 4. Divine authority goes live. Something has shifted that cannot be earned, forced, or imitated. There are doors in existence that do not respond to effort, no matter how relentless, sincere, or exhausting that effort is. They do not open for persistence. They do not open for talent. They do not open for suffering. They open only when authority is present. And authority is not something you demonstrate. It is something that is recognized. That recognition has just gone live. You may not feel stronger. You may not feel more confident. But something in the unseen structure now reads you differently. The same space that once ignored you now pauses. The same resistance that once felt immovable now hesitates. Not because you pushed harder, but because the condition required for response has been met. Authority is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply changes how reality answers you. This is why effort alone never worked before. You were knocking on doors designed to ignore force. They were not stubborn. They were precise. Until authority was active, they remained inert. Now they respond because they must. Not emotionally, not personally, structurally. You may notice the change first in how people react to you. Not everyone and not consistently, but enough to feel uncanny. Some will show respect without knowing where it comes from. Their tone shifts. Their posture adjusts. They defer slightly without realizing why. Others will resist you with sudden intensity, becoming defensive or dismissive out of proportion to the situation. And some will expose themselves unintentionally, revealing motives, insecurities, or truths they never planned to show. None of this is about your behavior. It is about position. Authority creates reaction simply by being present. It rearranges social dynamics without effort. People respond based on what they sense, not what they understand. Respect emerges where none was taught. Resistance flares where control is threatened. Exposure happens when masks no longer hold under pressure. This can feel unsettling because it removes the illusion that outcomes are purely relational or logical. You are not doing anything new. You are being recognized differently, and recognition does not ask for permission. The same applies to systems. Structures that once blocked you, processes, hierarchies, institutions, repeating obstacles, begin to behave strangely. They bend in places they never bent before. They fracture where they once felt solid. Paths open that were not available no matter how perfectly you followed the rules. This is not coincidence. Systems are designed to respond to rank. When rank changes, systems either comply or reveal their brittleness. Some will adjust smoothly, as if they were waiting for the signal. Others will resist until the stress exposes their limits. In both cases, the outcome is the same. Obstruction loses permanence. What once required constant effort now requires presence. What once demanded justification now proceeds without explanation. This can feel disorienting because your instincts were trained in resistance. You learn to push, to prove, to endure. Authority removes the need for those reflexes, but the body remembers them anyway. Understand this clearly. This is not favor. Favor suggests preference. Preference can be withdrawn. Preference depends on mood, opinion, or mercy. What is active now is recognition of rank. Rank is not emotional. It is positional. It is acknowledged whether liked or not. That is why reactions will be mixed. Favor produces warmth. Rank produces clarity. Some welcome clarity, others resent it. Neither reaction changes the reality of the position itself. You are not being elevated because you are special in the way people usually mean that word. You are being acknowledged because you meet criteria that cannot be faked. Criteria that remain invisible until the moment they are verified. Authority is granted quietly and recognized suddenly. This is why there was no announcement, no confirmation, no external sign that said, "Now you are promoted." Heaven does not operate through applause. Loud promotions invite interference. Quiet promotions lock in before opposition can respond. Irreversibility is the marker. Once authority is active, it does not cycle on and off. It does not get revoked because of opinion. It does not fluctuate with emotion. You can ignore it. You can misunderstand it, but you cannot undo it. The recognition is now part of the structure. This is why interactions feel heavier, why words carry more weight than you intend, why situations resolve faster, for better or worse. Authority compresses time. Decisions have consequences sooner. Resistance surfaces immediately. Alignment accelerates without negotiation. Nothing about this requires you to perform differently. In fact, attempts to perform often distort authority. Authority works best when it is unself-conscious, when it does not try to prove itself, when it simply occupies space and allows reality to adjust. That adjustment is already happening. Some doors open without ceremony. Others make noise as they give way. Both responses are correct. Not everything was meant to survive your arrival at this level. Some structures were built only to hold you back when authority was inactive. Once that condition changes, their purpose expires. This can feel unfair to those around you. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of receiving advantages. But from your position, nothing about your internal posture has shifted. Only the response has. That dissonance is unavoidable when rank becomes visible. Heaven does not explain promotions to those who do not recognize authority. It simply allows reality to demonstrate it. The demonstration is not dramatic. It is consistent. Doors open. Resistance collapses. Reactions intensify. Outcomes shift. And once this process begins, it does not reverse. There is no demotion ceremony, no public acknowledgement of error. Authority, once lived, remains live. The only sound is the quiet rearrangement of everything that now must respond. Chapter 5. The Traps Dismantled in Real Time. There were futures prepared for you that looked generous on the surface. They were not disasters. They were not obvious failures. They were carefully engineered slow drains, lives that would have kept you occupied, respectable, and tired. Relationships that felt meaningful but never quite reached depth. Callings that sounded noble but required you to shrink just enough to fit inside them. Paths where you were always close, always almost, always one adjustment away from fulfillment that never arrived. These were not accidents. They were traps designed with patience. The most effective trap is not pain. It is almost loved, almost seen, almost successful, almost free. A future that gives just enough reward to keep you investing, but never enough to let you arrive. Over time, that kind of future empties a person out, without them realizing what is happening. Energy drains quietly. Years pass cleanly. From the outside, it looks like a life. From the inside, it feels like circling. Multiple versions of this were constructed around you. Not one path, but many. If you rejected one, another waited. If you escaped a relationship, a similar one appeared. If you turned down a role, another false calling rose with slightly different language. The variety was intentional. The outcome was the same: motion without destination. These futures were built to be convincing. They matched your values just enough. They appealed to your compassion, your sense of responsibility, your desire to matter. They asked for sacrifice early and promised clarity later. And later never came, because clarity was never part of the design. Tonight, those futures collapse. Not gradually, not one by one, all at once. Entire life paths that would have unfolded over decades simply stop generating momentum. Connections lose their pull. Opportunities evaporate. Desires that once felt urgent go flat. The scaffolding that supported those possible lives is removed, and without it, they cannot stand. This can feel disorienting because collapse does not always feel like relief at first. It can feel like loss, like something was taken from you, like doors closed that you were still hoping might open. You may grieve what you thought you were moving toward, the version of yourself you imagined becoming inside those futures, the stories you told yourself about how it would all make sense eventually. That grief is real, but what you are grieving is not freedom, it is familiarity. A cage does not always feel like a cage when you have learned how to decorate it, when you know where the walls are, when you've adjusted your movements to fit the space, when you've built identity around surviving inside it. The idea of leaving can feel like loss. Even when the cage was draining you, even when it was shrinking you slowly, it was predictable. Predictability feels safe to the nervous system, even when it costs you everything else. The collapse removes that illusion. What makes this moment severe is the timing. The enemy did not abandon these traps lightly. Years were spent refining them, adjusting angles, studying what kept you engaged, keeping you circling exits that looked real but led back into the same room. You would think you were leaving, only to find yourself starting another lap with new hope and the same outcome. That circling was the point. As long as you were moving in loops, you were contained. As long as you believed the next turn would lead somewhere, you kept supplying energy. The enemy did not need to stop you outright. They only needed to keep you busy with futures that went nowhere. Tonight, the loops break. When the traps collapse simultaneously, there is no replacement offered. That is intentional. Replacement would invite negotiation. It would allow you to choose another almost. Instead, the field clears. The noise drops. The false options disappear without explanation. This can feel abrupt, even cruel, because the human mind wants transition. It wants time to say goodbye. It wants to process. But these futures were not meant to be processed. They were meant to be removed. What remains after removal is stark. There is no spread of possibilities, no branching maze of options, just one direction with weight behind it, one path that does not ask for persuasion. It pulls rather than tempts. This path moves fast because it is no longer competing with decoys. Speed arrives when distraction ends. Momentum appears when resistance is no longer divided. For a long time, your energy was split across futures that could not deliver. Now that those futures are gone, the energy returns to you all at once. That return creates acceleration, whether you are ready for it or not. This is why the collapse happens in real time, not in theory, not symbolically, in practical ways that affect decisions, relationships, environments. Things fall apart quickly because they were never meant to hold under this level of pressure. Their purpose was containment, not endurance. You may notice that explanations stop making sense. Justifications you once accepted feel thin. Promises that used to keep you engaged sound empty. This is not cynicism. It is clarity arriving faster than comfort can keep up. The enemy's investment is visible in how much disappears at once. They do not dismantle traps unless holding them becomes impossible. Something has shifted that makes maintaining these futures more costly than losing them. That cost-benefit change is not in your favor. It is in theirs. The strategy no longer works. So the cages are opened, not gently, but decisively. With the traps gone, choice narrows. Not because freedom decreases, but because illusion does. When fake options disappear, real direction becomes obvious. Obviousness feels like pressure when you are used to wandering. But it is not pressure meant to crush. It is pressure that comes from alignment. There is only one path left, because there was only ever one that led anywhere. And it does not wait. It does not pause to let you mourn every false future. It does not slow down to accommodate nostalgia. It moves with the urgency of something that has been delayed long enough. The pace can feel unforgiving because it does not match the rhythm of the life you are circling in. This is not because the path is harsh. It is because it is real. And reality does not negotiate with cages that no longer exist. Chapter 6. Invisible interventions begin. Movement is happening around you that you cannot see and were never meant to manage. Decisions are being made in places you will never visit, by people who do not know your name and may never hear it. Routes are changing. Schedules are breaking. Delays are introduced where speed once seemed certain. Accelerations occur where obstacles were expected. From your vantage point, it looks random. From the operational view, it is precise. People you have never met are being delayed, redirected, or repositioned for you. A meeting that doesn't happen when it should. A flight missed by minutes. A conversation postponed for reasons that don't quite make sense. These are not inconveniences. They are adjustments. Each delay removes a collision that would have pulled you off course. Each redirection brings a future contact into position without alerting either side to the significance of the encounter. The timing is not optimized for comfort. It is optimized for alignment. Some of these people will pass through your life so briefly that you never realize what they prevented. A sentence not spoken, a door not opened, a situation that never fully forms. Their role was never to stay, it was to intercept. Others are moved closer, step by step, unaware that their own restlessness, dissatisfaction, or sudden clarity is guiding them toward a moment that matters more than they know. At the same time, exits begin to occur in your own life, and some of them will be abrupt. People you expected to remain simply disappear from relevance. Conversations end without resolution. Connections dissolve without dramatic conflict. The speed of these exits can feel shocking, even cold, but this is not abandonment. It is completion. Their assignment has ended. Lingering would only create drag. Staying would require explanation. An explanation would introduce negotiation where none is allowed. These exits are clean because they must be. Emotional entanglement slows alignment. The system does not linger where purpose has expired. It withdraws, sometimes quietly, sometimes suddenly. Either way, the removal is not personal. It is procedural. You may be tempted to analyze these departures, to search for meaning in what you said or didn't say. But meaning is not always relational. Sometimes it is logistical. A piece that has fulfilled its function is removed to make room for the next phase of movement. The space it leaves is not empty. It is cleared. Then there are the arrivals. They come at moments that feel uncanny in their precision. A person appears at the exact point you would normally call coincidence. A message arrives when a question was still forming. An opportunity surfaces at the moment doubt would have closed you off. These arrivals do not announce themselves as interventions. They feel ordinary enough to be dismissed, but timely enough to be undeniable. The timing is the signal. These arrivals are not driven by shared emotion or mutual searching. They are not born from longing or chance attraction. They are placed, positioned, released into your path when alignment requires interaction. The people themselves may believe they followed instinct, that they acted on a feeling, that they just happened to be there. From their perspective, that is true. From above, it is incomplete. These are not emotional decisions. They are orders. Orders do not explain themselves to those carrying them out. They simply compel movement, a sense of urgency without panic, a pull without clarity, a feeling that now is the moment, even if the reason is unclear. This is how alignment operates without causing alarm. Too much awareness would interfere. Too much understanding would invite resistance. So the system moves quietly. What you experience as chaos is often synchronization occurring faster than the mind can interpret. Multiple lives adjusting simultaneously, each unaware they are part of a larger configuration. No single piece holds the full picture. That is by design. Centralized understanding creates vulnerability. Distributed movement creates resilience. This is why trying to control these shifts produces friction. Resistance to alignment creates pressure, not punishment. Pressure. The kind that builds when you push against a current that has already committed to a direction. The more force applied in opposition, the heavier the resistance feels. Delays multiply. Confusion increases. Fatigue sets in. Not because something is wrong, but because the motion is being resisted. When cooperation occurs, the sensation changes immediately. Acceleration replaces strain. Things that felt heavy suddenly move with minimal effort. Timing improves. Conversations flow. Obstacles dissolve without explanation. This is not reward, it is physics. Movement aligned with direction encounters less resistance by default. The difference between pressure and acceleration is not morality, it is orientation. You are not being evaluated here, you are being positioned. Alignment does not argue, it adjusts. If you move with it, momentum carries you. If you move against it, momentum pushes back. Both experiences are neutral responses to direction. The most disorienting part is that you are not given a map, only feedback. Pressure indicates misalignment. Acceleration indicates coherence. That is the entire communication system. Simple, unforgiving, effective. Around you, invisible hands continue to rearrange circumstances. A role closes before you step into it. A distraction fades before it fully forms. A support appears without being requested. None of this is sentimental. It is strategic. Emotion may accompany it, but emotion is not the driver. The operations are not concerned with how these changes make you feel. They are concerned with placement. Placement determines exposure. Exposure determines outcome. Every delay introduced elsewhere protects a convergence here. Every exit creates capacity. Every arrival serves a function that may only last minutes, but alters trajectories permanently. This is not inefficiency. It is precision, scaled beyond individual awareness. And because these interventions are invisible, you are not asked to believe in them. You are only asked to experience their effects. Sudden openings, clean endings, timely encounters, shifts that feel both disruptive and strangely right. The urgency you feel is not panic. It is synchronization approaching completion. The environment is tightening around a configuration that must lock in without interference. Loose pieces are removed. Necessary ones are pulled closer. Excess motion is dampened. Essential motion is amplified. Nothing here is random. Nothing here is personal. It is alignment executing itself through human movement, indifferent to preference, exact in timing, and unwilling to slow down for interpretation. Chapter 7. Your presence becomes a weapon. Something in the space around you has changed its chemistry. Not visibly, not dramatically, but consistently. When you enter a room now, the air does not stay neutral for long. Stories that were held together by performance begin to wobble. Explanations that once sounded solid start to crack at the edges. Not because you challenge them, not because you expose them, but because lies lose structural integrity in your proximity. This is not confrontation, it is destabilization. Lies depend on agreement, on silence, on the willingness of the environment to cooperate by not reacting. Your presence interrupts that cooperation. You do not speak differently. You do not press for answers. You do not interrogate. And yet falsehood begins to sweat. Small inconsistencies surface. Tone shifts. Over-explaining starts. Defensiveness appears where none should be necessary. The lie feels watched, even when you say nothing. This is why manipulators respond to you before you engage them. Irritation arrives early. An edge enters their voice. A sudden need to assert control. Or the opposite. Forced charm, excessive friendliness, attempts to manage perception before anything has happened. These reactions are not about you personally. They are about what your presence activates. Manipulation relies on predictability, on the ability to steer emotion, timing, and narrative. But around you, those controls slip. The manipulator cannot find the lever. The usual tactics don't land cleanly. The rhythm is off. The expected response doesn't come. And without feedback, control becomes unstable. Some grow defensive. They sense exposure before it happens. They feel seen without being observed. Their stories tighten, becoming rigid, brittle. Others overextend, revealing too much too soon, trying to anchor reality before it drifts. In either case, the mask begins to slide. You are not pulling it off. The environment is rejecting it. This is why you do not need to fight. Fighting creates noise. Noise gives lies something to hide behind. But here, truth does not require effort. It activates automatically, like a system coming online when the correct identity enters the field. You are not enforcing truth. You are triggering it. This activation does not depend on your intention. It does not wait for your permission. It is not something you switch on or off. It simply happens. You may even wish it wouldn't sometimes because of how quickly situations clarify, how abruptly dynamics change, how fast people reveal who they are when they realize performance will not hold. Truth around you is not gentle. It is efficient. This ability was not always active. There was a time when you could sit in false environments without disruption, when deception flowed normally around you, when manipulation functioned without resistance. That was not because you lacked this capacity. It was because it was dormant. Dormant abilities are not weak. They are withheld. Activation requires conditions, not emotional readiness, structural readiness. The surrounding framework had to be able to absorb the impact. Truth released too early destabilizes everything, including the one carrying it. So it waited, silent, inactive, observing, until the timeline changed. With that shift, the conditions were met. The environment could now respond without collapsing, and so the ability came online without ceremony. No surge of power, no internal announcement, just a noticeable difference in how reality behaves around you. You may feel this as a subtle isolation, not loneliness, but separation. Conversations feel shorter. Small talk thins quickly. Games end early. You move through interactions faster, not because you rush, but because there is no longer anything to sustain illusion. This can be uncomfortable for others. Truth removes wiggle room. It compresses options. It forces alignment or exit. People who rely on ambiguity for safety feel exposed. People who depend on deception for leverage feel threatened. They may accuse you of being intense, judgmental, or difficult, even when you remain neutral. These accusations are projections. They are attempts to externalize discomfort caused by internal instability. The key distinction here is that this ability is not something you do. It is something you are. That is why it cannot be removed. Behavior can be modified, actions can be restrained, words can be controlled. Identity cannot be stripped without destroying the structure that carries it. This is why suppression never fully worked in the past. You could soften your tone, minimize your presence, try to blend, but the effect persisted at low levels, waiting. Now it is active because the identity is active. Identity-based functions do not require maintenance. They do not fatigue. They do not need reinforcement. They operate continuously as long as the identity exists in the environment. You cannot turn this off any more than you can stop casting a shadow by choice. The shadow is not aggressive. It is simply evidence of form. Around you, truth surfaces without announcement. Inconsistencies come into focus. Power dynamics rearrange. The room adjusts. People feel it before they understand it. Some step closer, relieved by the clarity. Others pull away, unsettled by the loss of control. You remain unchanged. That is the most unsettling part for them. There is no triumph in this, no sense of winning. Often, there is a strange neutrality. Watching things unravel without effort does not produce satisfaction. It produces awareness. You begin to see how fragile many structures are, how much of the world is held together by agreement rather than reality. Your presence withdraws that agreement. And because this function is tied to identity, not behavior, it does not depend on mood, confidence, or intention. It persists when you are tired. It operates when you are quiet. It activates even when you would prefer peace over clarity. This is why silence around you can feel loud, Why pauses stretch? Why people fill gaps with explanations they weren't asked to give? Truth rushes into empty space when illusion can no longer occupy it. Nothing about this is performative. There is no display, no spectacle, just a consistent outcome. Deception fails to stabilize. And once an environment has tasted that instability, it cannot return to its previous state. Even if you leave, the effect lingers. Questions remain. Doubt spreads. Structures weaken. Because truth, once activated, does not retreat politely. It simply remains. Chapter 8. You are no longer the target. The war does not stop. It does not pause to acknowledge what has shifted. It does not retreat simply because conditions changed. Forces still move. Pressure still exists. Conflict still unfolds in places you cannot see. But something fundamental has altered in how that war relates to you. The battlefield did not disappear. Your position on it did. You are no longer the target. For a long time, you occupied a fixed coordinate. Predictable, trackable, a piece that could be isolated, pressured, surrounded. Attention was focused on you because you were vulnerable to direct engagement. The effort required to destabilize you was worth the return. Resources were allocated accordingly. You were hunted because you were reachable. That condition no longer exists. You are not removed from the board. You are no longer pinned to a square. You have become a variable. Variables cannot be hunted in the same way. They cannot be surrounded. They cannot be calculated with precision. They disrupt equations simply by existing. And when a system is built on prediction, unpredictability becomes a threat greater than opposition. This is why the war continues without you at its center. Attention shifts away from what cannot be fixed in place. Focus moves towards stabilizing other elements. The pressure that once locked onto you loosens not out of mercy, but out of necessity. Pursuit becomes inefficient. The cost outweighs the outcome. Attacks are still launched. Orders are still executed. But they are aimed at coordinates that no longer correspond to your position. Strikes land where you used to be. Strategies unfold based on outdated data. The force still arrives, but it hits empty ground. You may sense this as a strange anticlimax. Situations that once would have escalated simply dissolve. Threats that once carried weight pass without impact. Conflict approaches, then veers off, as if confused. The energy of opposition feels unfocused, misdirected, unable to lock on. This is not immunity, it is misalignment. You did not become untouchable. You became unlocatable within the old framework. And without accurate location, force loses effectiveness. Power without precision wastes itself. This shift can feel quieter than expected. There is no victory music, no announcement of safety. Often there is a lingering alertness, a habit of bracing for impact that no longer arrives. The body remembers being targeted even when the threat has moved elsewhere. That memory gives rise to something unexpected. Survivor's grief. Grief not for people or places, but for versions of yourself that cannot follow you here. Selves that were forged under constant pressure. Identities built to endure attack. Reflexes shaped by danger. You may mourn the loss of who you had to be when every step felt contested. Those versions were real. They carried you through conditions that no longer apply. They were strong, resourceful, resilient. But they were formed for a battlefield you are no longer standing on. They cannot make this jump without dissolving. That dissolution can hurt. You may feel disoriented without the familiar weight of threat. Purpose once defined by resistance now feels unclear. When you are no longer reacting to danger, The absence can feel like emptiness. This is not weakness, it is transition without ceremony. The grief comes because survival required sacrifice. Pieces of yourself were sharpened, armored, narrowed to endure pursuit. Letting those pieces go feels like loss, even when they are no longer needed. You may miss the clarity that comes from having an obvious enemy, the adrenaline, the intensity, the identity forged in fire. But that fire is no longer your environment. From this point forward, your life no longer organizes itself around reaction. Reaction was necessary when pressure dictated movement, when every choice was shaped by what you were avoiding, surviving, or escaping. Reaction keeps you alive, but it never lets you lead. That orientation has ended. Advancement by design begins quietly, not as ambition, not as striving, but as movement that originates from intention rather than threat. Decisions are no longer made to minimize damage, but to maximize alignment. Paths open not because you fought for them, but because they were built to receive you once the targeting ended. This does not mean ease replaces effort. It means effort becomes directed. Energy no longer bleeds into defense. Focus sharpens. Motion becomes efficient. You move because you are going somewhere, not because something is chasing you. Design does not rush. It does not panic. It does not flinch. It proceeds with clarity that reaction never had. Reaction looks backward to assess danger. Design looks forward to execute purpose. You may notice how different this feels in your body. Less tension in the shoulders, less scanning of the room, less need to explain or justify your presence. The nervous system slowly realizes it is no longer under constant aim. That realization takes time. Habit lingers after threat leaves. You may still brace for attacks that never arrive, still anticipate conflict that dissolves before forming, still prepare defenses that are no longer required. That is the echo of being hunted. But the reality is this: the war did not claim you. It moved on without you at its center. You are no longer the piece everything orbits. You are the variable everything must now account for indirectly. This is a quieter power than being targeted, more subtle, more destabilizing to opposition. Variables change outcomes without direct engagement. They alter the field simply by existing where prediction fails. And because of that, attention shifts elsewhere. Pressure relocates. The noise moves on. What remains is motion with intent. Not survival, not resistance, not reaction. Design. Chapter 9. Memory realignment begins. Memories are not returning because you asked for them. They are surfacing because their function has changed. Moments you thought were sealed, buried, or finished rise without warning, not with violence, but with precision. They arrive intact, detailed, familiar, and strangely neutral. These memories are not here to wound you. They are here to release you from the version of yourself that had to be built to survive them. For a long time, memory was armor. You remembered in order to stay alert. You carried the emotional weight of the past as a warning system, a way to prevent repetition, a way to stay alive. Pain sharpened recall. Fear kept details vivid. Survival required you to become someone shaped by what happened. That version of you was necessary then. It is no longer required now. So the memories return, not to drag you back, but to sever the bond between the event and the identity it forced you to adopt. You may notice something unsettling at first. A memory appears with full clarity, but the emotional response doesn't follow. The image is there. The scene is accurate, but the reaction is missing. No surge of anger, no spike of fear. no tightening in the chest. It's as if the memory is being viewed through glass instead of relived through the body. This absence can feel wrong. You might wonder if you are becoming numb, detached, or indifferent. But this is not numbness. It is reassignment. The emotion is not gone because the memory was erased. It is gone because the memory no longer owns it. For a long time, memory and emotion were fused. One triggered the other instantly. Recall meant reliving. Thinking meant feeling. The enemy relied on this bond. Emotional recall was leverage. A single thought could collapse momentum. A single reminder could pull you backward into patterns that no longer served you but still felt familiar. This is how regression worked. Not through new attacks, but through old memories activated at the right moment. That system no longer functions. The memories rise now under new authority. They present themselves without demanding a response. They exist as data, not directives. You see what happened without being forced to become who you were when it happened. The separation is subtle but total. This is not healing in the way it is often described. Healing suggests repair, soothing, comfort. This process is not focused on making you feel better. It is focused on making you unattached. The meaning of those moments is being reassigned. The memory remains, but its role in shaping your present is revoked. What once defined you now informs you, and even that role is limited. You may feel a quiet grief as this happens, not grief for the event itself, but for the identity that grew around it. The hardened edges, the hyper-awareness, the internal rules you lived by. Those traits were forged under pressure, and letting them go can feel like betrayal of the self that endured. But endurance is not the same as permanence. The enemy depended on emotional recall because it bypassed conscious choice. You didn't have to decide to go backward. A smell, a tone of voice, a familiar scenario could pull you there instantly. Emotional memory collapsed time. Past and present blurred. Old survival responses took over without permission. That collapse no longer occurs. Now, when a memory surfaces, it does not drag the present into it. The timeline holds. You remain where you are. The past is observed, not re-entered. This is catastrophic for any force that relied on reflexive return. Because once memory loses emotional charge, recall loses control. Control requires urgency. Emotion provides urgency. Without it, memory becomes inert. It can be examined, acknowledged, even dismissed. It no longer commands behavior. It no longer dictates reaction. It no longer defines identity. This does not make the memory meaningless. It makes it accurate. Accuracy without emotion is dangerous to systems built on manipulation. It exposes what happened without exaggeration or minimization. It removes the narrative power of trauma while preserving the truth of experience. Nothing is denied. Nothing is dramatized. The memory simply exists. And existence alone is not enough to bind you. This realignment may happen suddenly or in waves. A cluster of memories may surface close together, as if a file has been opened and cleared. Others may appear individually, triggered by nothing obvious. The pattern is not chronological. It is functional. Memories return when their emotional charge is no longer useful. You are not being asked to confront them. You are not being asked to process them. They are being released from duty. That duty was survival. Once survival is no longer the organizing principle, memories must either adapt or be decommissioned. Emotional recall is decommissioned first. Without emotion, memory cannot pull you backward. Without backward pull, progress is not sabotaged from within. This is why the process feels quiet. No catharsis, no dramatic release, just a noticeable lightness where weight used to be. A thought arises and passes without consequence. A recollection appears and dissolves without impact. This is not suppression. Suppression requires effort. This requires none. The enemy's grip weakens not because memories vanish, but because they no longer answer the same commands. Triggers fail. Old scripts do not run. Familiar scenes no longer activate familiar responses. The system attempts recall and receives neutrality. Neutrality is fatal to control. What you are experiencing is not forgetting. It is detachment without denial. The memory is acknowledged, but it does not reach into the present to shape who you are allowed to be. That authority has been revoked. Once emotional charge is removed, memory becomes historical rather than operational. And history, no matter how detailed, cannot command the present. It can only be known. That knowing is calm, clear, undramatic, and irreversible. Chapter 10. The rules around you change. The world around you has not become kinder. It has become different. What once demanded relentless effort, endless pushing, and constant self-correction now responds with far less resistance. Not because you improved your technique, not because you finally figured something out, but because the rules governing interaction have shifted without asking for permission. You can feel it in the way strain leaves situations early. Where you once had to force momentum, movement now happens with a single step. Where persistence used to be required just to stay in place, motion begins almost immediately. This is not relief earned through endurance. It is a change in operating conditions. Resistance used to be built into the environment. Effort was taxed heavily. Progress came slowly and at a cost that drained you over time. That tax has been lifted. Not universally, not for everyone, but around you, specifically. The field responds differently now. Pressure dissipates faster. Barriers soften or fail outright. Situations no longer linger in indecision. They resolve. Either they align quickly, falling into place with little negotiation, or they collapse just as fast, removing themselves without prolonged struggle. The long, grinding middle, the exhausting season of trying to make something work that never quite does, disappears. What belongs stabilizes. What does not dissolves. This speed can feel unsettling. You may expect resistance that never arrives. Prepare for battles that end before they begin. The nervous system still braces for drawn-out conflict, but the conflict refuses to sustain itself. Outcomes declare themselves early. This is not momentum. Momentum implies build-up, acceleration through force over time. This is different. This is a law shift. When laws change, outcomes change, even when inputs stay the same. The same actions now land in a different reality. The same words produce new responses. The same decisions echo farther than they used to. You are not moving faster. The environment is responding sooner. Under the old rules, effort compensated for misalignment. You could push against resistance long enough to produce partial results. It was inefficient, but possible. Under the new rules, effort no longer compensates. Alignment does. Things either respond immediately or refuse entirely. There is little middle ground. This is why exhaustion shows up quickly for those unaware of the change. They keep applying old strategies. They push harder. They double down. They escalate effort, assuming resistance means they haven't tried enough yet. But the resistance they feel is no longer an obstacle. It is feedback. They are fighting rules that no longer apply. And the fight drains them faster than before. You may witness this around you. People expending enormous energy to maintain positions that no longer hold. Repeating behaviors that once worked but now produce diminishing returns, trying to force outcomes that collapse under pressure instead of yielding. The environment does not reward stubbornness under new laws. It exposes it. What once required endurance now requires compatibility. This does not mean things are easier. It means they are clearer. The cost of misalignment is immediate fatigue. The reward of alignment is immediate movement. The lag time that once obscured cause and effect is gone. That clarity is sharp. You may notice that your smallest actions now have disproportionate effects. A decision made quickly resolves an issue that once dragged on for months. A single refusal ends a pattern that previously required explanation after explanation. A quiet step forward opens space that effort could not force open before. This is not power in the dramatic sense. It is leverage created by rule change. When laws shift, even minimal input can create maximum output if it matches the new conditions. If it does not, output collapses entirely. There is no partial success, no slow progress, no reward for trying harder. The same actions now produce different outcomes because the system interpreting them has changed. Think of gravity adjusting slightly. Objects fall differently. Movement feels unfamiliar. Those who don't notice keep jumping the same way and wonder why they miss the ground. Those who sense the change adjust without thinking and land cleanly. This is why confusion spreads among those who rely on habit. They assume effort equals result because it always did before. They do not realize the equation has been rewritten. They exhaust themselves not because they are weak, but because they are operating under outdated assumptions. Around you, the cost of ignorance increases. Long struggles no longer indicate virtue or commitment. They indicate misalignment with the current law. Persistence without responsiveness becomes self-inflicted strain, and strain no longer produces progress. It produces collapse. This can feel ruthless, but it is not personal. Laws do not negotiate. They apply uniformly within their scope. Around you, the scope has shifted. What responds easily now would have resisted endlessly before. What resists now would have tolerated pressure in the past. The reversal is complete. This is why you may feel as though you've stepped into a different version of reality without traveling anywhere. Familiar situations behave differently. Known patterns fail to repeat. Outcomes surprise you, not because they are dramatic, but because they are efficient. Efficiency replaces endurance. The environment no longer tests how much you can take. It reveals what fits. The test is no longer about survival. It is about coherence. Things that match move. Things that don't break or fall away quickly. That speed can be mistaken for instability, but instability lingers. This does not. Resolution arrives swiftly and decisively. There is no prolonged chaos, just rapid sorting. Those who remain unaware of the law shift will continue to fight shadows. They will interpret collapse as resistance instead of misalignment. They will double down on effort where adjustment is required, and they will tire themselves out trying to win battles that no longer exist. You are not spared from effort. You are spared from wasted effort. And the difference is immediately visible in how quickly things now answer you or remove themselves from your path altogether. The rules around you have changed. They will not change back. Chapter 11. Delayed miracles activate answers. Begin to move that you no longer remember asking for. Not because you reminded the universe, not because you returned to hope. They move because the request never expired. Only the response was held. What you once prayed with urgency, then whispered with doubt, then released entirely, was never discarded. It was suspended. filed, timed, waiting in a corridor beyond impatience. You stopped praying for them because praying without response reshapes belief. Repetition without reply teaches restraint. Eventually, you learned to let go, not as surrender, but as self-preservation. You detached emotionally from outcomes that once defined your sense of safety. And it is precisely after that detachment that motion begins. This is how delayed miracles activate. They do not arrive when desire is loud. They arrive when attachment is gone, when the outcome no longer owns your emotional balance, when receiving it would not destabilize you or expose you to unnecessary risk. The system does not respond to longing alone. It responds to readiness without dependence. So help arrives late by human standards, after you've already adjusted, after you've stopped checking for signs, after you've built a life that assumes the answer may never come. That is not indifference. That is containment. What arrives now does not announce itself as a miracle. It appears practical, ordinary, almost anticlimactic. A conversation shifts, a door opens quietly, a burden lifts without explanation. The drama you imagined never shows up, because drama would reveal too much, too soon. Earlier activation would have exposed you. Exposure is not always visibility. Sometimes it is vulnerability. Sometimes it is timing that places you in reach of forces you were not meant to face yet. Sometimes it is success arriving before structure exists to hold it. Miracles activated too early do not protect, they attract attention. That is why waiting felt cruel. From your perspective, the delay seemed unnecessary, even punitive. You measured time emotionally. You felt loss accumulating. You believed the absence of response meant denial or neglect. But timing was not measured by comfort. It was measured by risk. Protective sequencing rarely feels protective while you're inside it. Events had to occur in a specific order. Other outcomes had to resolve first. Certain attachments had to weaken. Certain identities had to dissolve. Certain threats had to lose access. If the miracle had activated earlier, it would have placed you in direct exposure. You would have received what you asked for at the cost of something you could not afford to lose. So it waited. Clearance is not permission in the moral sense. It is clearance in the operational sense. A green light given only when all surrounding conditions no longer pose threat. When movement can happen without triggering counteraction. When assistance can arrive without drawing interference. That clearance has been granted. This is why the answers move now, when you are no longer emotionally reaching for them, when you have already grieved the possibility of their absence, when receiving them will not control you. The miracle arrives not to rescue, but to restore alignment that was delayed for your protection. You may feel a strange dissonance when this happens. Gratitude mixed with grief, relief mixed with a quiet anger at how long it took. You may think, why now? Why after I let go? The answer is not personal. It is structural. Miracles are not delayed because you are forgotten. They are delayed because you are seen too clearly to be placed at risk. What feels late was never late. It was waiting for clearance. Clearance from environments that would have exploited the outcome. Clearance from internal dependencies that would have twisted it. Clearance from timing that would have made the miracle a liability instead of a gift. You may notice how seamlessly the answer integrates now. No shockwave, no collapse, no chaos. It fits into your life without tearing it apart. That fit is the evidence of correct timing. Earlier, it would have ruptured something essential. This is why the help arrives after emotional detachment. Detachment is proof that the miracle will not become an idol, a crutch, or a bargaining chip. It arrives when you are capable of receiving it without surrendering agency or clarity. You are not being tested anymore. You are being trusted. The system that withheld response was not indecisive. It was precise. It waited until the miracle could move without putting you back into danger, dependency, or exposure, until it could arrive cleanly and remain. This reframes the entire waiting period. What you experienced as abandonment was shielding. What you interpreted as silence was coordination. What felt like cruelty was sequencing too complex to explain in real time. Now the answers move quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. They do not seek recognition. They simply take their place where they always belonged. The delay collapses into coherence, and the long gap suddenly makes sense. Not emotionally, but structurally. You may look back and realize that earlier arrival would have cost you everything, that you were spared outcomes you thought you wanted but could not yet survive, that the absence itself was part of the answer. But that realization comes after the movement begins, because once clearance is granted, the system does not hesitate. What was held moves quickly, not to compensate for lost time, but because it was never idle. It was staged, prepared, aligned. Waiting does not mean inactive. It means unseen. And now, unseen movement becomes visible, not as spectacle, but as inevitability. Final 12, identity convergence. The moment you've been moving toward, whether you knew it or not, has quietly arrived. Deep within you, two versions of yourself begin to dissolve into one. The person you were meant to be, the essence forged before time's weight pressed on your shoulders, and the person you were forced to become, the armor, the mask, the survival strategy shaped by countless battles. These two identities start their convergence. No longer separate, no longer at odds, they begin to fuse into a single, unstoppable whole. For years, you may have felt torn, like a battlefield inside your own mind, where the self you hoped for warred with the self you needed to survive. This division created chaos beneath the surface, a hidden war more devastating than any enemy outside your skin. Every choice was a tug of war. Every step forward was slowed by conflicting loyalties within. But tonight, that division starts to crumble. The war within ceases, and the peace it births feels strange and powerful. Inner conflict lessens because those fractured parts are no longer competing for your allegiance. Instead of battling each other for control, they are blending their strength, their wisdom, their scars. The fierce protector and the quiet dreamer begin to walk side by side, not in opposition, but in harmony. This union is not seamless or painless. It is raw and sacred, like molten metal, cooling into an unbreakable alloy. You may feel moments of tremor as old tensions surface and then dissolve, but the direction is unmistakable, toward unity, toward coherence. With this merging comes clarity. Decisions that once felt like impossible puzzles, each piece pulling you in a different direction, now unfold with surprising ease. It is not because your options have disappeared, but because alignment has arrived. Your choices no longer fracture your energy, they channel it. Where once you hesitated, doubted, or recoiled, you now move with a quiet certainty born from a soul fully present to itself. This is the clarity that follows inner peace, a kind of vision that slices through noise and distraction, revealing the path that belongs to you. This convergence is a silent crisis for your enemies. They relied not only on the battles fought around you, but more devastatingly, on the battles fought within you. Your internal division was their greatest weapon. It created hesitation, self-doubt, and delay. While they attacked the surface, the deeper warfare was their domain. They didn't need to strike as hard when your spirit fractured itself from inside. It was a slow siege that drained you without firing a shot. Now, with this convergence, that weapon dissolves. A unified identity is not just stronger, it is fundamentally harder to delay. Power can be blocked, deflected, or contested, but a self-whole and aligned moves beyond interruption. It accelerates time itself. Resistance falters because it can no longer find a crack through which to seep. When you stop being divided, you stop being predictable. The enemy loses the map they once held so tightly. This identity convergence marks the dawn of your sovereignty, not as a title given, but as a state of being reclaimed. It is the reclaiming of every fragment of yourself, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, past and promise, into one undivided whole. You are no longer scattered across timelines of who you were or who you were forced to become. You are concentrated here, now, in your full power. Feel this transformation deep in your bones. It is a convergence that hums with urgency and finality. It is the collapse of old separations that tethered you to delay and doubt. Your very identity is becoming a weapon against stagnation and surrender. Nothing outside you can hold you back, because nothing inside you is breaking apart. This is not just growth. This is reclamation. This is the rise of the chosen one, fully awake. Know this truth as it settles in your core. You have merged the fragments the enemy tried to keep apart. Your strength is now seamless, your focus undiluted. The weight that once pulled you sideways has been lifted because you carry yourself as one. This is the secret power no enemy can undermine. You are no longer fractured. You are whole. You are no longer divided. You are aligned. You are no longer delayed. You are advancing, unstoppable, unmistakable, and irrevocable. Chosen one, this is your sovereignty claimed. Stand firm in it. Let it fill every corner of your being. If you feel this power stirring, if the truth of your unity resonates deep within, then act now. Like this video, subscribe to this channel. Comment, "I am whole" below, and mark this moment as your declaration. Your commitment to living fully in the identity that no force can fracture. You were never meant to wander fragmented. You were never meant to stumble through inner battlefields alone. Tonight, you stand as one. The chosen one is no longer divided. The chosen one is whole. The chosen one is here, and nothing can stop what you have become.